Okay.
Thank you, everyone. We are asking that everyone remain muted until we get to the part of the agenda where you are asked if you have any comments. Thank you.
Everybody's got a tie on.
As I would tell, chestnuts don't talk.
Geico, your claims team is here for you 24/7.
Well, the things to do is chestnut.
Okay, can everybody hear me? Thumbs up, okay. I'm calling this meeting to order. Welcome everyone to the regular city council meeting of November 8th, 2021. And the first thing after I call the meeting to order calls for a roll call of the city council. Will the city clerk please call the roll?
Progress.
Here we go. Counselor Long,
Present.
Counselor McLaughlin,
Present.
Counselor Runyon,
Present.
Counselor Randall,
Present.
Counselor Richardson,
Present.
and Mayor Mays.
Present. Item 3 is Pledge of Allegiance. Councilor Darcy Long will lead us in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You were on TV just a minute ago. Your head, your flag, Regis said.
Okay, item, I'd like to remind everyone to please stay muted.
Everybody's watching it from all over the world tonight.
Okay, item 4 is approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
I'll second that.
It's been moved by Councilor Runyon and seconded by Councilor Long to approve the agenda. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of approving the agenda, please raise your hand or say aye.
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 Thank you. Item 5 is audience participation. During this portion of the meeting, anyone may speak on any subject which does not later appear on the agenda. 5 minutes per person will be allowed. If a response by the city is requested, the speaker will be referred to the city manager for further action. The issue may appear on a future meeting agenda for city council consideration. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to address the city council on any item that does not appear later on the agenda? Anybody? Okay, going once, going twice. Okay, last call. Okay, thank you. Item 6 is city manager's report. our interim city manager, Daniel Hunter. Mr. Hunter, do you have a report?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Mays. A couple of items for the council's information. We've got one seasonal employee who is currently working as a janitor cleaning the restrooms at Lewis and Clark Festival Park. And since the park is closing, my intent is to lay that employee off effective the 15th of this month. The employee's already been informed of this. I don't believe that since this employee is temporary, that council needs to rule on it relative to the conditions of a pro tem position, city manager. I just wanted to bring it to your attention. And the other issue I'd like to advise council on is I had a meeting with the Houseless Task Force, including members of the community and Mayor Mays, as well as St. Vincent de Paul. St. Vincent de Paul's intent is to see if they can hire some seasonal employees over the winter for warming shelter. They've had significant difficulty in getting volunteers this year, and OHA has approved them to have a limited number of houseless in their facility here in the Dalles for warming shelter. The issue at hand is they don't have funds to hire staff since they typically don't have staff on hand for this. MCAC has agreed to give St. Vincent's 20,000, and my intent is to add 20,000 from the city's economic recovery fund that is budgeted in the city council budget for economic recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, unless council disagrees with that.
I have a comment on that.
Certainly.
So thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry. So I would prefer that the language around that would be up to $20,000 and that we would be the third party source, because they are not open every single night. They're only open when the weather meets the requirements. And so it's possible that they won't need all of the money that they're budgeting for. But if they do, of course, I want the city to be part of that solution.
I think that's fair. And just for council's information, the budget that I sent out via email a couple of days ago, maybe it was last week, with St. Vincent's budget, that's worst case scenario. And they're only allowed to house up to 9 people in there. And this is typically going to be folks that are 86 from hotels and the pods down at the port.
And if it was a normal year and they didn't have special COVID funding that's specifically for this and an influx on top of their regular funding, I wouldn't be making this proposal. So I just want to make that clear.
Okay, thank you. Is there anything else, Mr. Hunter?
That is it. Thank you.
Thank you. City Attorney's report. Mr. Kara, do you have anything to report to the council or to the? Kara, do you have anything to report to the council?
No report from me tonight. Thank you very much, Mayor Mays.
Thank you. Okay, now we'll move to city council reports. The first one I see is Councilor Runyon.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. The meetings that I've had, and there have been several in the last 2 weeks, probably more than that, regarding the Veterans Parade coming up on Thursday, November 11th at 11 a.m. Applications are due by tomorrow, the 9th, at the Dalles Chamber of Commerce. And I think the fee is $15 to be in the parade. It doesn't matter how many units are in your particular group. It's just one fee. And $5 of that will go back to the Mid-Columbia Veterans Memorial Committee, of which I'm president. So looking forward to having a lot of people out on the street on Thursday at 11 a.m. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Randall.
Thank you, Mayor Mays. On October 28th, Q-Life met. It was a brief meeting. We received the financial report and administrative updates.
Scott, you're freezing up.
Since last meeting, I've been reviewing and researching and that's my report.
Okay. Scott, we missed part of that. Because you were frozen, and I'm going to call on the other two and then come back to you, okay? Counselor Long.
Thank you, Mayor Mays. So the last couple of weeks, in terms of meetings for the city, I've mostly been focused on the Design LLC infrastructure agreement, also known as the Google Water Agreement, and participated in an executive session with the city attorney, as well as many calls and emails from the public. So many emails, I haven't had a chance to respond to everyone directly, but I did read them all. Thank you.
Thank you. Counselor McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mayor Mays. I just want to say thank you to Main Street and the Dalles Lions Club for making a safe event for our kids downtown for the Halloween celebration. It was a wonderful, well-attended event, and that's all I have to report this week.
Okay. Thank you. Back to Council Randall. You're muted, Scott.
Mr. Mayor, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I'm on my phone. Yeah, my internet's all freezed up here. I'll see if I can get that fixed. In the meantime, I'm not sure where I left off, but as I said, there was a Q-Life meeting on the 28th of October where we received a financial report and some administrative updates. And since the last city council meeting, I've been researching and reviewing tonight's action item and also responding to emails regarding the same. And that's my report.
Thank you. We heard you loud and clear. Thank you. I don't have any report tonight. Okay, item 8 is the consent agenda. Items of a routine and non-controversial nature are placed on the consent agenda to allow the city council to spend its time and energy on the important items and issues. Any councilor may request an item be pulled from the consent agenda and be considered separately. Items pulled from the consent agenda will be placed on the agenda at the end of action items section. Tonight, we have 5 items on the consent agenda. We have minutes from the October 25th council meeting to be approved. We have asking for 2 appointments to be approved that I'd like to make. One is Debbie Ferrer, who's present tonight, I believe. I'd like to appoint Debbie to the Beautification Committee, and secondly, Leanne Lewis to the Urban Renewal Budget Committee. Also, the consent agenda includes declaring some surplus property from the police department and amending 2 resolutions regarding non-discrimination on the basis of disability and also fair housing. And these are minor amendments and sort of housekeeping items for these 2 resolutions. So with that, I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda. Oh, Counselor Long.
I'll move to approve the consent agenda.
Was there a second?
Yeah, McLaughlin will second.
It's been moved by Counselor Long and seconded by Counselor McLaughlin to approve the consent agenda. Is there any discussion? All those in favor say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
I see unanimous approval. Thank you very much. Item 9A is a general ordinance regarding legislative subpoenas to the Dalles Municipal Code. And with that, I'd like to call on our city attorney, Jonathan Cara, to give a staff report.
Thank you, Mayor Mays.
There is, excuse me,
Can I leave yet?
there's a legislative, this is a hearing.
That's right.
Okay, so yeah, first I have to ask for the staff report, and after that, we'll be taking testimony. So with that, I'm opening the public hearing. Go ahead,
Thank you
Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mayor Mays. City Council, so tonight I will be presenting my staff report regarding General Ordinance number 21-1387. The gist of this ordinance, which is attached in your agenda packet tonight, is to allow the city to have some enforcement authority when it comes to its own code. And so very regularly, city attorneys all across this country will present ordinances before their city councils to become the law of the city that we're in. And not as commonly, those ordinances will not have an effective mechanism internally within them to see to their own enforcement. And so this is a problem that is rather pervasive, but is a problem with a solution. And so here, with this legislative subpoena ordinance that is before you tonight, it's going to, you can think of it as a tool that we can use in our tool belt to determine whether or not any violations of our code have existed or will exist. And it's very widespread. And so generally, the city regularly finds itself, and by the city, I generally mean me and the staff member who I'm helping trying to enforce our code with, finds ourselves in situations where we need additional information, not authorized for disclosure from the code, from someone to determine whether or not they violated our code. An example that I'm happy to share with you all tonight, and our finance director, Angie Wilson, is here, and she can speak on this as well, not to call her out or anything. But what we found ourselves in enforcing our transient room tax is a situation where we have penalties associated for failing to provide your tax returns that a transient room lodging operation may need to file with the city. And so that's very robust. However, the transient room code, for example, doesn't provide a mechanism for the city to actually retrieve those files on its own. And so the League of Oregon Cities put together a very straightforward model legislative subpoena ordinance, which I've adapted slightly and tweaked slightly just for our benefit here in the city of the Dalles, which would, instead of making it unlawful or a misdemeanor or a violation to withhold records that are necessary to determine whether or not somebody is not paying their taxes to the city, this gives us a mechanism to actually review their tax returns or to review their financials directly from, VRBO or Airbnb. And so the issuance of a legislative subpoena in that regard is the tool in our belt that would allow us to gain access to those records to determine exactly how much someone may owe the city. It looks like somebody is screen sharing. That is not me. Okay, I think we're back. So under this proposed ordinance, the way I'm proposing that it works is that the council may authorize either the city manager or anyone else, or me, to issue a subpoena for the purposes of compelling the attendance of witnesses or the production of records in any proceeding pending or potentially pending before the council. And so matters that are typically pending before this council are on the agenda, but those matters that are potentially pending before the council include potential violations of our code. Throughout our code, we have an appeals process. Usually it's an appeal to the director of whatever department is responsible for administrating the code. And then after the department head, it usually leads into an appeal to the city council. And so you can imagine that this would affect nearly all matters of the council, but baked into the code, the proposed code at least, it would require a resolution be passed by the council. So it's not as if you'd be authorizing the city manager or the city attorney with a blanket subpoena to go find whatever they like at any time, but it would involve the city manager or the city attorney coming back, presenting their evidence for what they think might be a violation of the code, but also illustrating that we might need some additional information. And so this legislative subpoena ordinance gives the city the confidence to know that it can find out whether or not a violation is occurring. And so the only budget implications that I understood to be associated with this would be staff time, as well as some nominal witness attendance and mileage fees. Those are set by state law. And it's basically just there to ensure that anybody we compel to produce something is given a few bucks to go out of their way, depending on how far away they live. But it would be an unusual situation to not pay them. And so we're happy to. What's fair is fair. And it's all set by state law. And so again, this LOC model ordinance has been tweaked slightly just to fit the confines of our code, but it is a type of ordinance used very regularly throughout the state, throughout cities, throughout the state. Staff's recommendation is moving to adopt this ordinance as presented and listed in the agenda packet.
Thank you, Mr. Kara.
Thank you.
I will, pursuant to the public hearing process, now that we've had a staff report, I'm going to call for testimony in support of the issue. And then I'm going to call for testimony in opposition to the issue. And then I will conclude at the conclusion of the testimony, I'm going to close the public hearing and open it up for council deliberation. So with that, is there anyone in the audience who would like to testify in support of the resolution? Excuse me, the ordinance. Anybody?
Mayor, I would like to.
Debbie Ferrer, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I have had an Airbnb here in the Dalles for about 4 years now, and I have faithfully paid my occupancy tax. And I know that I'm probably one of the very few who does that. And so I really appreciate that the city is, trying to, make this more universal for all those numerous Airbnbs and VRBOs to, to comply with that city ordinance. So, so thank you for doing that.
Thank you for your comments. Is there anyone else who would like to speak in support of this ordinance? Okay. Is there
Mayor?
anyone who would?
Can I get
Yes.
Debbie's address, please?
Oh, I'm sorry. Debbie, could you give your address, please? And I think we know how to spell your name.
Yeah, sorry about that. Debbie Ferrer, 900 West 18th Street in the Dalles.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak in support of the ordinance? Okay, is there anyone in the audience who would like to testify in opposition to the ordinance? Anybody? Last call. I see a Vera. Do you want to speak, Vera? Oh, I guess not. Never mind.
No, thank you.
Excuse me?
What'd you say?
I said, would you like to speak? I saw you were unmuted.
Oh, that was an accident. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. All right, I'm now going to close the
Timothy?
I'm going to close the public hearing. I will now ask the city council to deliberate. Is there anyone in the city council has any comments on the proposed ordinance?
I'll just comment and say it seems like a reasonable step for us to take just to close the loop. And obviously it's not something that can be abused since it comes back before city council before it can be implemented. But it's good that we're closing this gap and able to enforce what we're requesting.
Thank you. Anybody else? Is there anyone who would like to have the ordinance read in full?
I'd like that to be read.
Anybody on the
Can
city council?
Timothy read it?
Is there anyone on the city council who would like to see the ordinance read in full?
Is this a class here?
Okay, if assuming no one wants it read in full, I'd like to ask the city clerk to read by title only. Ms. Grossman.
And coordinate with partners in operational functional areas of the business to ensure.
Look at me,
Mr. Chair, is
Timothy.
there some way to eliminate whoever's doing?
Timothy.
Isaiah, can you hear me? Isaiah,
People,
can you mute?
1987, an ordinance amending Title 5 by adding Chapter 5.01 legislative subpoenas to municipal.
Isaiah, can you mute Jacob Holmes, please?
God damn it, I fucking hate niggers. I hate niggers so much, god damn.
Stop that music off.
Niggers, why don't we kill all niggers, put that on our agenda. Kill all niggers. And just kill
Misty,
them.
there's somebody behind you.
Can the city clerk please mute Jacob Holmes and Caden?
Can you kindly put this music on?
Stop me! Stop me!
Okay.
Him out.
It is Jacob Holmes.
Yes. And Caden. Okay.
What did I do?
Did everybody hear the city clerk read the title only?
Her mic was pretty glitchy while she was saying it. It must have been like them having music on top of it.
Isaiah, could you please read it by title only again, please?
Hear me?
Yes.
Okay. General Ordinance number 21-1387, an ordinance amending Title 5 by adding Chapter 5.01 legislative subpoenas to the Dalles Municipal Code.
Thank you. I'd like to ask for a motion to approve the ordinance.
This is Runyon. I will make a motion to approve.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
It's been moved by Council Runyon and seconded by Councilor Long to approve the ordinance.
This is Runyon. I'm gonna tell all you to kill all niggers.
All those in favor, please say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much.
Mr. Mayor, this is Councilor Runyon.
Yes.
There must be some way on the city council's end to mute that individual. We know who it is, we see the name, and that's got to stop.
Rod, I have been. It's just that there was more than one, and I am actually muting them over and over. We have a couple duplicates. Someone has called themselves Rod Runyon, but since they were talking and you were not, it was pretty clear to me, so I removed them.
Thank you. Technology is wonderful.
This is Councilman McLaughlin. We also need to shut the share screen down because the next thing is going to be something disturbing.
Were they?
I did that when that happened.
What?
Okay, I think Mason Wiles should be
What?
muted, and Michael Rose
Oh, yeah.
and John Kerry.
Who cares?
Isaiah, do you need to you need some time?
I don't give a shit.
I'm doing the best I can, I promise.
I know. Isaiah, why don't you just let us know when you're ready to proceed, okay? Okay, I think we'll go ahead and proceed with item 10A. This is consideration of an ordinance authorizing an infrastructure agreement with Moraine Industries, otherwise known as Google. This has been previously discussed with the City Council on September 27th as a discussion item, and tonight a resolution is under consideration. Here's the process going forward from here. First, I'm going to ask for a staff report from our Director of Public Works, Dave Anderson. Then I will ask for a staff report from Mr. Jonathan Kara, the City Attorney, regarding a legal issue. Then I will, after the staff reports, I will open it up for questions or comments from the City Council. After the City Council has a chance to ask questions, I will then entertain input and questions from citizens. I would ask all citizens to do three things. One is to state your name, spell your last name, and state your address for the record. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes. We would ask that you not be repetitive. For example, you can say, I agree with Mr. Smith. And after the public input, it will go back to the City Council for discussion and deliberation. Then, if the City Council chooses to proceed, we'll consider a vote on the resolution. So with that, I will now ask Mr. Dave Anderson to give a staff report. I would ask him, Mr. Anderson, please. You have obviously played a very key role in the City Council's consideration of this agreement. And I would ask you to first describe your background for those attending tonight's meeting, your experience, and also your qualifications. For those who may be at our last meeting on September 27th and are attending tonight. So please proceed. Thank you. I would ask them, Mr. Anderson, please.
Thank you, Honorable Mayor, members of council. I have worked for the city for 33 years. The last 15 of those serving as the city's public works director. I've been involved with managing the city's water rights for about 20 years, applying for new rights, defending our existing rights when needed, and consolidating our existing rights to provide the greatest flexibility in their utilization. I was also involved in the negotiations for the 2015 development agreement with Design LLC. So some of these concepts are not new to me. For the issue tonight, Rain LLC and Design LLC, collectively, I'll refer to them as Design, are pursuing a potential opportunity to construct new data centers in the Dalles on the old aluminum plant smelter site. City staff has worked with Design to draft an infrastructure agreement that would provide for the utility and water supply needs of the proposed new development while not compromising the interests of other existing or future city utility customers. We presented these concepts of a potential infrastructure agreement with Design to the City Council on September 27th. Those concepts have now been incorporated into the draft infrastructure agreement before you tonight. Much of the report presented to council for tonight's meeting was already discussed in some detail on the 27th. So I will go through some of the information a little quicker tonight, focusing on some of the additional information and answering questions that were raised in our prior discussion. The potential construction of any new industrial development, including a data center, requires an understanding of what the utility needs and the city's capacity to meet those needs would be. It's been the practice and the policy of the city to require new developers at their expense to provide utility improvements needed to serve the developments. In support of water and sewer utility planning efforts for this proposed development, a number of analyses and reports were completed to guide the staff in making technically sound decision-making. This report will provide a summary of the efforts completed, again, much of which was presented on the 27th, and present the proposed agreement. Since the city's water master plan is 15 years old and didn't anticipate this type of a development, 3 additional studies were done in support of our analyses. The first one was an analysis of the city's existing water supply capacities and projections for what the city's future water supply needs would be with this development occurred and the rest of the development that is anticipated to occur in the city actually took place. The summary of that, or the findings of that report, were that the city's existing water supply capacity is about 9.9 million gallons per day, and that the future demands might approach about 17.5 million gallons per day on a peak day. So from this analysis, it was evident that the city was going to need additional water supplies to meet the future demands of the city. The report identified and recommended a three-pronged approach to building future water supplies. And the first one was for the city to develop all of its existing water rights, because the city currently holds about 5 million gallons a day of water rights that are currently undeveloped. The second prong was for the city to acquire the existing groundwater right from the old smelters.
Ooh, here we go.
These were the
Oh no, wrong Zoom.
water rights previously held by Northwest Aluminum. These are water rights that are currently owned by Google. So these are existing water rights and not new water rights.
Yeah.
The third prong would be the implementation of an aquifer storage and recovery program. And under an ASR program, water would be taken from the watershed sources. Do I need to take a break for a second, Mayor?
Yes, please do, just for a minute. Let's give her a chance to. Okay, Dave, go ahead.
I'm not sure, did any of that cut out, or we're talking about the aquifer storage and recovery?
Well, you didn't cut out. It was just hard to hear you.
Okay, okay.
Why don't you back up a little bit to the ASR?
Okay, so the third prong that was recommended to provide additional water supplies to the city.
I'm listening to the.
Mr. Gleason, oh, thank you. Go ahead, Dave.
Third prong was the development of an aquifer storage and recovery program, or ASR. Under an ASR program, water would be taken from the city's watershed source, from the mountain streams, in the winter, in the spring, when flows are abundant, treat that water, send it to town, and inject it into the aquifer.
Shut the fuck up, Mom.
Where it would be stored, just as we would use with a surface water storage project. Under an ASR, and I want to make a minor correction here to the information in the staff report, and also that was presented on the 27th. State regulations require or only allow a utility to withdraw up to 95% of the staff report says 90%, but it's actually 95% of the water that's injected. So the aquifer always retains at least 5% of the water that's being recharged, and over time, then there's a benefit to the aquifer because of that. The city has its limited license or water rights that it needs to implement an aquifer storage and recovery program. The second study that was done looked at what infrastructure needs would be necessary to meet the needs of the projected growth. And since much of this growth was projected to occur on the port and in the commercial areas downtown, the infrastructure improvements are focused in those areas. Major improvements needed to meet those future demands included new water mains to be constructed in the port, a new above ground finished water reservoir in the port, new wells, a booster pump station, and also identified that the wells in the pump station would be equipped with emergency backup generators to add resiliency to the city's water system, a feature that most of all of our existing wells lack. The third study then that was conducted looked at groundwater quality and addressed the issue of whether there was a potential for contamination of water being supplied by new wells on the port because of some of the previous industrial activities that occurred there. And the results of that study were that there was no contamination in the aquifer that we're talking about, and that risk was very, very low. With all that information, city staff met and negotiated the proposed infrastructure agreement with design, and it identifies a number of improvements. These improvements would all be designed, permitted, constructed at design's cost, and then handed over to the city for future ownership and operation. The first project was water main looping to connect the newly constructed 18-inch diameter port water main to the existing 12-inch line and River Road. The second project was the construction of a new groundwater well with approximately 1,800 gallon minute capacity and an emergency backup generator. Third was a construction of an ASR, or Aquifer Storage and Recovery compatible groundwater well with an 1,800 gallon per minute capacity and a backup generator. Fourth was construction of a new above ground storage reservoir located on the port to serve the entire service zones that extends from the port and all the way back through the downtown commercial area of the Dalles. Next project was the construction of a booster pump station to deliver water from the new reservoir into the service zone at the proper pressures. Be a requirement for a construction of a new sanitary sewer pump station to serve the design facility or the proposed design facility and adjacent industrial customers. And there was a construction of a new sanitary sewer main from the pump station under the Union Pacific Railroad tracks to the newly constructed main in West 2nd Street. And then a construction of a shared utility access corridor from River Road to the UP Railroad tracks for access to the proposed utility systems. The estimated cost of these improvements taken in total and with some contingencies included is about $28.5 million that would be paid by design for improvements to be given to the city. In addition to the constructed projects, the proposed agreement provides that design will provide the city with certificated water rights for a total of about 3.88 million gallons per day. And construction of the new wells would follow the transfer of design's water rights to the city. Design's also granting to the city land and or easement satisfactory for the utility needs of the city as they relate to these projects. I want to emphasize that the capacity of the water rights and the capacity of the new wells to be proposed to be constructed are both greater than the amount of water being requested by design for this new development. So there's a net benefit to the city in proceeding with these improvements. There's also some commitments that would be by the city under the agreement. And the first is that contingent upon the successful transfer of the water rights to the city will provide design's facility with an adequate water supply and sanitary sewer capacity. The city would implement the Aquifer Storage and Recovery Monitoring Program. This is work that's already underway by the city. The city would accept the 8 projects constructed by design for ownership and operation after they're completed to city standards. The city would initiate an update of the city's water master plan within a year of the effective date of the agreement. And the update of the water master plan is something that we already had budgeted and planned to do in the city's 2021-22 budget. Another obligation, the city recently completed a federally required risk and resiliency assessment of its water system, and information from that risk and resiliency assessment will be incorporated into the updated water master plan and inform development of a capital improvement plan. Again, this was the intent of that risk and resiliency assessment all along. The city will credit the cost of providing certain design constructed projects against water and sewer SDCs that's allowed in the municipal code. This would occur regardless of whether this agreement is adopted or not, because the municipal code allows for credits against SDCs when improvements are constructed that can supply customers other than the developer. The city would not discriminate against design in the setting of fees and rates. The city would seek to supply recharge water to the new ASR well on the port as it's feasible to do so. We would utilize the same temperature modeling in the issuance of an industrial discharge permit for any new development, as was done for the existing development and other large industrial dischargers to the city. The city would consider a memorandum of understanding with design regarding water supply scenarios for the 310 service zone. And the city would work cooperative with design if there are new rules related to temperatures for wastewater discharge to Columbia. Nearly all of those commitments that were just outlined for the city that are included in the proposed agreement are items that are already underway, planned, and are budgeted to occur by the city. Some additional supplemental information following up on the conversations that occurred on September 27th, I think it's important to emphasize that the rights included in the water rights included in the proposed agreement are existing water rights associated with existing wells that are owned by design. These are not new groundwater rights. The rights are proposed to be transferred from design to the city, not the other way around. And without the agreement, design or other private entities could use the existing wells and water rights as they needed, just as the aluminum plant did previously. Another point is the capacity of the aquifer was analyzed by the report that the first report I referenced that looked at city system and demands. We understand that the sustainable annual yield of the aquifer, the Dalles groundwater reservoir, which is the same aquifer that the city's existing wells utilizes, is about 5,500 acre feet per year. And that currently 2/3 of that, or 3,700 acre feet per year, is not being used. So there's capacity in the aquifer to support this proposed agreement. The water levels within the Dalles groundwater reservoirs have not been declining in recent years. And in fact, they've increased significantly since the Dalles Irrigation District began utilization of water from the Columbia River in 1966. With acquisition of the groundwater and new groundwater rights and new wells as proposed in the agreement, the city would further optimize utilization of its water supplies across all its sources, including surface water live flows, stored surface water, aquifer storage and recovery, and native groundwater wells. The new groundwater rights would become another tool for the city to utilize in addressing climate change and meeting the water demands of the full community, including the port industrial area. Without this agreement, it's possible that all the water needed to supply a new development on the smelter site could be drawn from the Dalles groundwater reservoir, as an industry can use its own water sources as it needs. With the agreement, the sources of the supplies to the new development on the smelter site can be supplemented from the groundwater, but it can also utilize surface water sources. So the agreement actually is intended to reduce the demands on the Dalles critical groundwater, or excuse me, on the Dalles groundwater reservoir. And lastly, the state-approved water management conservation plan provides that the #1 priority for allocation of potable water during any shortage is to meet the minimum health and safety allocations for indoor residential needs, which includes single family, multifamily, hospital, convalescent homes, retirement homes, mobile home communities, student housing, firefighting, and public safety. So in short, residents will not be without water as a result of this proposed agreement. Under the proposed agreement, the city would be receiving more water rights and new well capacity than is being requested by design. Attached to this report, the city had received a letter of support from Mid-Columbia Fire and Rescue Chief Robert Palmer, supporting water system supply and infrastructure improvements that increase the city's firefighting and associated ISO ratings as they impact insurance rates within the community. The improvements identified in this agreement will add to the city's resiliency and capacity as supported by the fire district. Staff's recommending authorization of the proposed infrastructure agreement with Moraine LLC, Design LLC, through adoption of resolution number 21-028, authorizing the city manager to execute the agreement. In terms of budget allocation, the proposed infrastructure agreement is if authorized through resolution number 21-028, the city will be committed to implement an aquifer storage recovery monitoring program at an estimated cost of about $30,000, and that work is already underway. And we would be obligated to updating the city's water master plan, which is identified in the current budget at a cost of about $490,000. Upon application for a building permit, Design would pay to the city water and sewer system development charges in an amount determined by the permit application, but at the same rates as other developers within the city. Design would pay for the design, permitting, and construction of water and sanitary sewer system improvements, currently estimated to be about $28.5 million. And Design's facilities are, once Design's facilities are operational, they will pay the same water and same sewer rate, utility rates as all the other city and industrial and commercial customers. With that, it'll be staff's recommendation that the city council move to adopt resolution number 21-028, a resolution authorizing the city manager to execute an infrastructure agreement with Moraine Industries LLC and Design LLC. With that, I would try to answer any questions. I believe there may have been some other letters of support that were received, perhaps directly by the city after this report was drafted.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Before we get to questions, though, I'm going to ask Mr. Kara, our city attorney, to address a legal issue. Mr. Kara.
Mayor, did you ask me to do something?
No, I'm asking Mr. Kara to unmute himself and address the council. Should we come back to you, Jonathan? Okay.
Thank you, Mayor Mays. I wasn't able to unmute myself, which is probably for the best. So thank you, Izette. I appreciate your patience tonight. I know you have a lot going on, so thank you very much for helping with this. Okay, so thank you very much, Mayor Mays. Yes, and so I just wanted to inform the council, since I didn't have an opportunity to touch base with most of you, since the city brought its action on October 29th, concerning this agreement's confidentiality and its redaction of trade secrets from the recorded version of the proposed agreement tonight. And I wanted to sort of bring this to your attention tonight in case it impacts your decision. I would like you all to be as informed as possible. And so very frequently when we start talking about pending litigation, the buzzwords that you'll most often hear are on advice of my attorney, we can't speak of it. And that's certainly true in this case as well. But on advice of your attorney, I would like to just bring 2 points to your attention. The first being, why exactly is this lawsuit being filed? And one of the things that comes to mind when we talk about lawsuits is, person A versus person B. And so I wanted to sort of set the record straight and to sort of inform you all of the reason why the city is bringing this case and why it is considered an action in a court of law. So the process generally for deciding public records disputes is laid out by statute through ORS Chapter 192. And there it provides us that if the city determines certain records are exempt from disclosure, then the appeal process for a requester is to bring a petition to the district attorney for which the city is located. In this case, a petition was brought for review of the city's decision to withhold records from disclosure to the Wasco County District Attorney's Office, who issued an order pursuant to ORS Chapter 192 and reached a different conclusion than the city did when it came to the disposition of these records. And so if a district attorney arrives at a different conclusion and orders the city to disclose the records, the city's recourse is to then ask the circuit court as the next step in the appeals process to review the district attorney's opinion. And so while the requester hasn't wronged the city by making this request, the city filing a lawsuit in circuit court is the mechanism through which the Oregon legislature decided disagreements concerning public records should be settled. And so although the case that was filed that we're referring to is City of the Dalles versus Mike Rogaway and the Oregonian, that is the regime intended by the Oregon legislature when it enacted the public records law. And the second issue that I wanted to bring to the council's attention is the matter of who's paying for the lawsuit. And some members of the public and members of the council have asked me the amount of dedication of city resources that are involved into preserving these trade secrets. And so I wanted to share exactly how that has been arranged. And it dates back to 2015. And in 2015, the city and design entered into a development agreement, similar in a lot of respects to tonight's proposed infrastructure agreement. But the 2015 agreement was for the existing developments. And then the city council approved at a public meeting, and the city publicly recorded the agreement in the Wasco County Clerk's office in December of 2015. And in that recorded agreement, it provides that in the event the city receives a public records request for information regarding the project. The agreement stipulates that the parties to the agreement agreed that they would cooperate in preserving confidentiality to the maximum extent allowable under Oregon law. And that cooperation would be at no additional cost or expense to the city. Practically, what this means is if the city does incur costs in the course of preserving confidentiality, such as fees and costs associated with the subject public records appeal, here in this case, design would be contractually obligated to fully reimburse the city for those costs. And so that was an agreement that was contemplated and agreed to in 2015. And so we are simply following through on the motions there. I have the same staff recommendation as our esteemed Public Works Director, Dave Anderson. But I just wanted to bring these 2 points to your attention from a legal perspective in case it informs your decision any better tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kara. With that, I'm going to open it up to the City Council for questions for the staff. Councilor Richardson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Dave, thank you for your staff report. It's clear and it's detailed and it's a very helpful context. I would say to neighbors at large, if people are really interested in this matter, I highly recommend that they, look up some of the reports that are public, we've made public, and take a look at this staff report. It's got an awful lot of information that might be helpful. Dave, can I lay out my understanding of a couple of points that I think are at the heart of this matter and just kind of get your professional opinion about whether I'm thinking about things properly? That'd be okay?
Yes.
Alrighty. So, I've got emails and calls and whatnot from a number of people that say something to the effect of don't give away city water to Google. People are concerned about drought conditions and climate change. And, the fact is we only have so much water to go around. These are all obviously really good points. But as I understand it, we don't get to decide that. That's not the question before the city council. My understanding is Google has legal access to this groundwater, has a water right, it has physical access. It's state law, and that's just not something we get to vote on. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. Again, I want to reiterate, these are existing groundwater rights that Google or Design LLC already owns. They could use them with no involvement by the city whatsoever.
All right, let me follow up briefly on that if I could. So then if I understand correctly, the question before council is something more like who controls the faucet? That is, in other words, if the city gets control of Google's water supply, do the costs of that relationship outweigh the benefits? You've talked about a number of the benefits. The costs seem pretty modest. Is that, is that a fair way to put the question that we're considering?
I think it is. Yes.
Thank you.
Mayor Mays, may I ask Dave a question? Oops, Rich, you're muted.
I assume that Councilor Richardson is finished because he just muted himself. So
yes,
he's nodding his head. Go ahead, Councilor McLaughlin.
All right. This is for Dave Anderson. I noticed on social media the assertion that this agreement would place the agricultural community at risk of insufficient water supplies in the future. It is my understanding that the Dalles irrigation system uses an independent source of water supply. Is that true?
That is correct. The Dalles Irrigation District draws water from the Columbia. Now, certainly not all irrigators are served by the Dalles Irrigation District, but the irrigation district itself is served by the Columbia and not groundwater from the Dalles groundwater reservoir.
Thank you.
Is that it, Councilor McLaughlin? You're muted. Tim, you're muted. Are you?
Yes, now Izetta is controlling it for her, from her end. So yes, that's all I have to, all
Okay,
the
thank
questions
you.
I have.
Counselor Long.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Izetta for unmuting me. So I wanted just to ask some questions in general, Dave Anderson. People are talking about this agreement as if this is the only thing we're going to do to protect our future water supply for the city. And it's my understanding that just from generally talking about going into our planning long-term, that this is just one step, and it in fact implements some things that we were already considering. It's just that Google is helping pay for those things and assuring that we have that water available to the city sooner rather than later. And we still have other opportunities to potentially secure more water with more of the aquifer storage recovery later, if that's what we choose, or another technology should it become available.
Councilor Long, that's correct. We have the limited license, the water rights to do aquifer storage and recovery. This will expedite the construction of the first well and begin that project. For some comparison, the city has a storage project now that we've had since the mid-1960s called Crow Creek Reservoir, located in a watershed. That well, or excuse me, that reservoir has a capacity to store about 267 million gallons of water. Our plan for the first aquifer storage and recovery well would be to be able to store about another 244 million gallons just with that one well. Total ASR build out over time could be up to 1,200 million gallons per year. So, you know, this is a very significant opportunity to develop more storage and improve the city's climate resiliency, as well as the condition of the aquifer over time.
Okay. So just to summarize, that this puts us ahead on this point, and we're not done figuring out what we're going to do for the city for long-term water, correct?
We're not done. No, you know, water supply planning is an ongoing effort. Our water master plan will be a nice update to those efforts. We've talked in the past, and the council is certainly aware of our project to replace the very leaky Dog River diversion pipeline. That's going to really improve the efficiency of the city's water delivery system, eliminate loss, and help us again move forward in a more efficient manner into the future.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the city council? Councilor Runyon.
There we go. Director Anderson, some of the letters and calls, et cetera, have been in concern about public safety, notably the hospital, water needs, that sort of thing. You went over it, I believe, in your report. In fact, I know you did, and on the 27th in even more thorough detail. But the state, my point is, the state has some rules about public health and safety regarding water supply in years where there may be shortages or so forth in the future. Is that correct?
That is correct. And again, the city's own plan, which has been approved by the state, our water management conservation plan, identifies that public health and safety is the #1 priority to be met by the city's water system. It overrides all other uses.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions from the city council to the staff, Mr. Anderson or Mr. Kara? Councilor Richardson.
Mayor, it looks like maybe, no, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Dave, this is a question for you. With regard to aquifer recharge, the idea is we'd be able to take some out if necessary, or when it was prudent or helpful to a certain amount. And we have some understanding of the aquifer recharge rate. My question is, can you speak to what happens under some like a hypothetical, bad case scenario, if that recharge rate slows down in the future? Are we, does this agreement tie us to that recharge rate? Does it put us in jeopardy, in your opinion? Can you just speak to that idea a little bit?
Yeah, so a couple of items there. First, the ASR water, I mentioned that our goal with the first well would be to store as much as 244 million gallons per year. That's not a use it or lose it thing. You can carry it over and store another 244 the next year and another 244 the next year. So you can actually build a pretty large bank of water in the years that you don't need to draw it back out to help you cover the years that you do need it. So that's probably the biggest element of how ASR can really get into it. And again, to 244 million gallons is for well number one, with a total target of being able to develop up to 1,200 million gallons per year of storage. And again, having the flexibility then to carry that water over from year to year, bank it when it's available, bank it when the surpluses are there, and draw on it when in the leaner years. Did that answer your question, Councillor?
And I missed your answer. Sorry.
Yes, thank you, Dave.
Yeah,
I
I'm
appreciate
sorry.
that. That's a tricky one for some of us. It seems a little bit of a black box, the whole aquifer, water underground and how that works. So I appreciate you having some discussion on that. Thank you.
Yeah, and I guess I would just add, this is not a new thing. It's not entirely wishful thinking, for example. This is a proven technology that's being used by numerous other utilities in Oregon. There are some requirements that the aquifer has to have certain characteristics for it to work, and all the information we've been able to develop so far, short of actually drilling our first well, is that our aquifer does have those characteristics, and that this is a viable option for us.
Any other questions from the City Council? Councilor Randall.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Anderson, on page 24 of the report, I'm just kind of confused about the lower paragraph where it talks about the aquifer storage and recovery system and how regulations allow a user to withdraw only up to 90% of the water stored. Is that a correct figure?
Well, and actually I attempted to correct that in my presentation. It's actually 95%. But yes, so the intent there is that you're never even taking all the water. Not only are you not overdrawing the amount that you put down, you're not actually withdrawing the full amount that you're putting down. The aquifer is always going to benefit from retaining at least 5% of what you put down. The numbers, instead of 90 and 10%, should be 95 and 5%.
Okay, so that's the amount of water you're actually putting into the aquifer.
Yes.
So, and is the user the city, or is that Design LLC? Is that
This would be the city.
Okay, I see. Another question I had was the wastewater. Is there any contaminants in that wastewater besides just the heat? I know it goes through the cooling systems, but other than that, it's still potable water, correct? It's just
It is not potable water.
Okay.
So that's why it goes back to the waste stream. And
Okay. And then after the 15-year agreement, after the 15 years when the agreement is up, what happens to those water rights? Do the city retain them?
so this agreement does not have a term. The SIP that was discussed previously, I think, has some 15-year terms in it. This one does not have terms. Those water rights are proposed to be transferred to the city in perpetuity. The infrastructure improvements are to be constructed and given to the city for the city to own and operate in perpetuity. There is not an end term associated with this agreement.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Any other city council questions or comments? Okay, I do have, every council member, including myself, has received several emails, many emails that I think have had some false information in them. And I'd like to go through with Mr. Anderson and go through sort of a true false test. If you don't mind, Dave, I'd like to read 11 statements to you. And I'd like you to indicate whether this statement is either a true statement or a false statement, okay? And again, this is pursuant to some of the emails that I think we've all received, okay?
Yes.
Okay. Number one, water levels within the groundwater reservoir have not gone down in recent years. In fact, they've gone up.
Correct. True.
Number two, as a result of this agreement, rural water users will not have any less water than they have now.
We believe that is true.
Okay. Number three, improvements as described, and we're talking about water mains, wells, emergency backup power, water system, water pump stations, sewer pump stations, sewer force mains, and utility access corridors. Those together, we think will cost about $28.5 million. Google is paying the entire cost of those improvements.
True.
Number four, improvements as described, as I just described them, will increase water capacity that will improve water service to not only Google, but for the rest of the city of the Dalles.
True.
Number five, Google is currently paying and will be paying the same rates for water as all other commercial and industrial users.
True.
Number six, water that Google uses will be treated at our wastewater treatment plant and discharged into the Columbia River and be subjected to Oregon state cleanliness and temperature standards.
True.
Number seven, Google is transferring water rights that they purchased from the old aluminum plant property to the city, not the other way around.
True.
Number eight, the fact that Google is transferring those water rights to the city makes it less likely that a drought would negatively affect the rest of the city because Google could use that 3.9 million gallons a day for themselves.
True.
Number nine, the amount of water requested by Google is less than the amount of unused capacity in the aquifer.
True.
Number 10, through the Aquifer Storage and Recovery Program, the city will be adding water to the aquifer versus drawing it down.
True.
And finally, in case of a major drought or other water-related emergency, new water rights and the ASR program will help improve water supply for the community.
True.
Thank you. Okay, any other last questions by the city council? Okay, I'm now going to open it up for input and questions from our citizens. I would ask you to please state your name, address, and spell your last name for the record. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes. Please do not be repetitive. And I would also like to start with a couple of our community partners who will be speaking to start off the community input. First is Mr. Scott Hagee, who is the chairman of the Wasco County Commission. Mr. Hagee.
All right. Hello, Mr. Mayor and councilors. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. What I thought I would do, you can hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay. We wrote a letter and I'll read it in the record and then I have a couple other things to say afterwards to the city council, city manager. The Wasco County Board of Commissioners would like to express our support for the water system agreement coming before the Dalles City Council at their November 8, 2021 council meeting. We believe this agreement will be a benefit to all the citizens of the Dalles in that. One, the agreement provides the city with control of millions of gallons of water daily. Two, Google will be investing millions of dollars for the added water infrastructure. And three, the result of the agreement will be improved water system for the city of the Dalles. We support this agreement. That will not only benefit the thousands of residents for years to come, it will also bolster water conservation efforts by significantly contributing to the public aquifer. And this letter is signed by myself as chair, Kathleen B. Schwartz as vice chair, and then Stephen D. Kramer as one of our commissioners. So I just wanted to make sure the city council is aware of our support for this agreement as we've understood it. I think what Mayor Mays just said before this, the true false was pretty clear on the benefits there. The only other thing I wanted to add was, and just so folks know this, recently, actually was in September 9th, Kate Brandt, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer for Google, explained Google's policy regarding water stewardship. And I think people should be aware of that. They have a goal, I think, by 2030 to actually be basically adding 120% of all the water they use in their data centers. They will basically provide 20% back over and above all the water use that they do. And they will do that in partnership with partners and everything. And it sounds like, frankly, what is happening here is part of that kind of a policy. So I think we appreciate the fact that the council, this is before the council, and we would encourage you to support it.
Thank you, Mr. Hagee. The second community partner is the fire chief for the Mid-Columbia Fire and Rescue, Mr. Robert Palmer. Mr. Palmer. Bob, why don't you wait till you're unmuted, okay?
Now I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, please.
I'll repeat myself. Thank you, Honorable. You said not to be redundant, but thank you anyway for the opportunity to speak here. So primarily, I think I'll do what Commissioner Hagee did. We sent a letter on the same token, and we'll read it into the record as well. Basically sent it out. Staff has done a considerable amount of research along with Mr. Anderson. I've known David for many years and certainly trust his judgment on this. He does his homework and he knows what he's doing. And he certainly does think of the community from a safety perspective. And so to give a background on this with our letter, I'm just going to read it very quickly. So the Insurance Services Office, which is known as ISO, Public Protection Classification Program, measures the effectiveness of municipal fire suppression efforts in communities around the country and helps insurance companies determine premiums for property owners in those communities. In general, the price of fire insurance in a community with a good PPC, Public Protection Classification, is substantially lower in a community with poor than with a poor PPC, assuming all other factors are equal. So relative to fire protection capabilities, you want your community to earn the best possible PPC. To put that in perspective, the lower your PPC, the higher or the lower your insurance rating or insurance costs. To evaluate your community's ISO's field staff collects information about your community's municipal fire suppression efforts. They use a manual called the Fire Suppression Rating Schedule to assign credit points for various features of your community's fire protection, including your water supply system, your fire alarm and communication systems, and your fire department. The maximum score is 100 points. Based on the score received, ISO assigns a public protection classification, a number from 1 to 10. 1 being the lowest, which is the best rating, and 10 being the highest, which is virtually no fire protection. Class 1 represents obviously the best, and 10 indicates the least. For each point you go up, your insurance rate would go up by 10%. For each point you go down, potentially your insurance rate would go down by 10%. And that's for businesses in particular. But the public in general will recognize, will see that difference as well. So there are several variables involved in the assessment process. Water resources are one of those assessed and are a vital component to earning a desirable PPC rating. ISO works with water companies and municipal water supply agencies on a nationwide basis to evaluate the adequacy of water infrastructures for fire suppression and effective firefighting. An effective water supply is a major component of community's PPC grade for purposes of firefighting. This amounts to 40% of the total PPC grade. So specifically, if you have water supply is rated at 40%, fire protection is at 50%, and communications is at 10%. Those all add up to 100%. Additionally, water supply is also important to insurers who must have an accurate and objective assessment of fire protection capabilities that serve the residents of our community. So that's an important portion of this. ISO's field analysts evaluate the amount of water available compared with the amount needed to suppress fires. They analyze whether the community has sufficient water supply for fire suppression beyond daily maximum consumption. ISO also surveys all components of the water supply system and provides an objective evaluation based on widely accepted national standards and criteria, which is specifically based on National Fire Protection Association. They survey fire hydrants for distances to properties, types, inspection, size, installation, frequency, and completeness of hydrant inspection and fire flow testing programs. ISO bases much of their water supply evaluations on needed fire flow, the amount of water that should be available for providing fire protection at selected locations throughout a community, and have established minimum criteria for their water supply evaluations. Making fundamental improvements in a community's water system is a viable method of improving a community's PPC rating, thereby enhancing fire protection capabilities. If your water supply doesn't meet minimum fire suppression rating schedule criteria, one generally can improve beyond a class 9. And that's your least desirable rating other than a 10. Sustaining and potentially improving our community's ISO classification and its fire protection capabilities requires resources and hard work. The fire district, along with other community leaders such as yourself, must partner to make critical decisions about priorities and budgets. This is a very good opportunity to create a robust water system down in the port area and as well as the community to be able to improve the fire protection rating, or the PPC, not just for the fire district, but for the community as a whole, because it's for the city and it's also for Chenoweth Water. Based on current and future developments planned for the port property, it has become apparent that without additional water supply, the city will not be able to meet the projected future water demands required resulting from the build out. So as noted above, or we noted previously, adequate water supply is an important component of a desirable PPC. So based on this premise, Mid-Columbia Fire and Rescue supports the city's plan to upgrade the water system capability within the 310 zone for purposes of sustaining and potentially improving our community's ISO rating and associated fire protection capabilities. Such an improvement would provide the fire district with a more robust water supply system with which to protect the lives and property of those we serve. That said, the fire district currently, and I'll make this brief as possible, the fire district is currently rated at a 3.9. So that means that within the areas of the city and out in the even 7 mile area and out towards the south end of the district, 5 miles out from the fire station, it's rated as a 3, which is very good for this community. But our goal is to actually move into a 2 if we can. So with the help of of some of the things that we're doing as partners, and that will help us get there. So we certainly support this opportunity.
Thank you, Chief Palmer. Does anybody on the city council have any questions for either Mr. Hagee or Chief Palmer? I don't see any hands raised. Okay. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Scott. With that, we'll move into the public input portion of our meeting. If anybody would like to ask a question or make a comment, this is your chance now. Once again, I'd like to ask that you limit your remarks to 3 minutes and that you state your name and address. And if needed, please spell your name for the record. I'm looking for a show of hands. Todd Carpenter. Go ahead, Todd. Please, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Todd Carpenter, 216 East 5th Street, the Dalles, Oregon. Carpenter, C-A-R-P-E-N-T-E-R. Hi, everybody. I'm going to try to keep it short because my beer is getting warm. And so Isaiah, please mute me after my 3 minutes or before if you want to. Thanks, everybody, for your volunteer city council hours and what looks like a lot of due diligence that's been done for vetting the project. We appreciate the leadership. I had a lot of questions about this last week. I didn't write a support letter, but after trying to educate myself around the Google initiative since late last week when I found out that MCMC had plans for a hospital, and the Google was what looks like is donating about 25 acres to the city for outdoor sports facility, which is going to be great east of Portland, the only one east of Portland. I thought I'd better educate myself on this a little bit. And so it was really great hearing Mr. Anderson's summary of the water rights, the retention, collection, and sanitation. It looks like, you guys have done a lot of work, and you're well on your way to fulfilling community needs, both short-term and long-term. Since the sports facility, is planned on acreage that Google owns, it makes sense that, the community kind of educates themselves. And I started doing that, like I said, late last week. They've done a really good job of supporting businesses, both directly and indirectly, including small business owners. I think that the sports complex is going to be pretty cool. We need to get behind it. I don't know if all of you know this, but I know you guys know me as Last Stop, but I also run a IT department for a very large hospital healthcare organization in Oregon, Washington. And so I've got some expertise around data centers. And so I just kind of want to offer a couple things around that to the community, because I know there's been some questions about the water and the proprietariness of this whole initiative that you guys are working on. Tech companies, specifically data centers, competitive by driving down costs at their sites. They do this by engineering, proprietary ways for cooling and heating. And just, given the proprietary nature of the solutions and the competitive nature of data centers, to me, it makes sense that they would want to protect these solutions by keeping their competitive edge, and keeping those things private. I don't know. I can totally understand why Google would want the data, wouldn't want the data released. I've been trying to learn a little bit more about the reporter that's, suing the information who's from the Oregonian. Don't understand why, if he says the information has been released somewhere else, why it's important to him that it gets released to, in this area.
Mr. Carpenter, you got 15 more seconds.
Okay.
So.
Well, that's all I want to say. I'm very, my family's super supportive about this and this initiative, and we appreciate what you guys are doing. Sounds like you all have done your homework, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Anybody else? Carl Schwartz. Go ahead, Mr. Schwartz. Let's wait for you to get on. There you go.
Okay, thank you. I was muted. So this question is for Mr. Anderson.
Mr. Schwartz, could you give us your name and address for the record, please?
Yes, Bruce Schwartz, SCHWARTZ, 3480 3 Mile Road in the Dalles. So my question is from, Mr. Anderson, in view of the Columbia River reaching lethal temperatures for migratory anadromous fish this summer, I'm curious about the temperatures that we discharge in the Dalles currently, and then what temperatures would be discharged when Google takes on a greater volume of water. And so what are the parameters in terms of temperature, and what do they reach in terms of maximum in the summertime? And I presume some of this is all public information, but I need to have some sort of understanding and hope you can answer that question.
Yeah, and thank you for that question. Unfortunately, I don't have the information on specific temperatures and what our outfall temperatures are right now. But I can tell you that we are within our permits parameters with DEQ. And one of the elements of an industry discharging to the city sanitary sewer system is that if they are going to contribute more than, I think the trigger is 2% of the flow to be treated by the city system, we undertake a temperature analysis, and we limit them on a case-by-case basis to be sure that the city stays within its temperature discharge parameters. That has been done for the previous Google facilities or Design LLC facilities here in town. That has been done for other industries that have higher volumes of water to be discharged to the city system, and that will be done for any potential new development on the smelter site to be sure that we maintain compliance with the DEQ standards, which are intended to protect the very benefits you were just mentioning.
So you don't have any numbers on some of those parameters?
I don't have the numbers with me, no.
Okay, thank you.
David, is that something that could be provided to Mr. Schwartz?
Yes, yes. We could work through a public information request. The industrial discharge permits that are already issued are a matter of public record, and those limits could be provided. It would take a little bit more work, but I think we also have the temperature discharge data from the wastewater treatment plant.
Mr. Schwartz, if you would contact the city clerk with your email address, I'm sure you could get that information within the next few days. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your question. Okay, anybody else? Matt Theriot. Did I pronounce that correctly, sir?
Hi, Mayor Mays. No, it's French, so it's Theriot. Okay. So thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. My name is Matthew Theriot, Theriot. Address is 603 Pentland Street, the Dalles, Oregon. I had a couple of questions here. Some were answered throughout the meeting. My first question might have a simple answer, so pardon the ignorance, but is there a reason we can't distill the water from the Columbia River?
So the city has a water right on the Columbia, but there are pretty strict federal regulations that make new withdrawals on the Columbia very difficult.
I see. So it's a federal,
basically
downstream of this issue.
It's basically a bucket for bucket replacement. If we want to take out, say, 1 million gallons a day, we have to find a way to put 1 million gallons a day into the Columbia upstream from where we're going to draw it. So it's a difficult challenge to me to make new withdrawals on the Columbia.
I see. Another question I had is, you mentioned 3 additional studies that were done for the purposes of this proposal. Are those studies public?
Yes.
Or could they be made public? Okay. Is that available on the website?
I believe we do have them posted on the website.
Okay, thank you. My final kind of comment is, like Todd said, it does sound like you guys have done a ton of due diligence and homework. I think there's a lot of skepticism around Google. From what I've heard, and I haven't been able to confirm with hard sources, there's been some broken promises from Google in the past. So I can definitely understand why, people are skeptical. I know outside of the Dalles, there's also been some, pretty significant issues of things that Google has done and been found criminally liable later. So one thing that ties into that is, I was completely under the impression this wasn't Google giving the Dalles, their water rights. I'm curious why they would do that if they have access to the the water under their property. Why would they share with us? Corporations tend to be selfish, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way. That's just what they're incentivized to do. So I don't quite understand the disconnect between what the public perception is and what is being discussed in this meeting. And that could just be, I guess a communication issue. I'm not sure.
That's an excellent question that has been asked. I know a couple of council members have asked Mr. Anderson, but Dave, why don't you go ahead and answer that?
So I kind of heard 2 points that I'll respond to real quickly. The first one is breaking promises or a history of broken promises. That hasn't been our experience. As was mentioned earlier, we've had an agreement with them since 2015 for a prior development. They completely fulfilled all the terms of that. We had no challenges with the execution and completion of those obligations. And then the second one is, why would they give these water rights to the city rather than and I think the short answer is they don't want to have to develop and operate and maintain a water system. There are a lot of obligations, regulatory requirements that go along with that. We're in the business of providing water. The city is in the business of providing drinking water and industrial water to the community. And it has a certain, a burden associated with that to meet all the regs. I think it's much easier for them to give us the supply in this case and then buy the water back from the city.
Okay. And if I have any time left, I had one last question. The ASR definitely sounds like an incredible option going forward. Sounds wonderful. Is it possible for the city of the Dalles to build the ASR without Google, or is that completely reliant on them?
No, it's possible that we wouldn't be able to move forward as quickly because they're expediting these planned improvements. They were actually very instrumental in us getting the water rights and what's called a limited license to be able to implement the program, but the city now has that limited license. And we could do it without them, but it would take a lot more time, and we wouldn't be talking about having an ASR well online in, the very near future.
Okay, understood. Thank you very much.
Sir, if you have any problems accessing those 3 reports that are public records, please contact our city clerk and she'll either take you through the process or send you the reports under separate cover, okay?
Okay, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Okay, Jay Ellison, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm calling in this evening with a question for Mr. Anderson. I am a county resident and not a resident, but I am in the rural.
Excuse me, I need your name and
Oh, I'm
address,
sorry.
please.
Certainly, Josh Ellison, and I'm at 6563 7 Mile Hill Road. And as a county resident, I wanted to get one clarification from Mr. Anderson. But first, out of full disclosure, I work in the IT industry and totally understand the proprietary nature of what Google wants. I am, though, in support of their disclosure only because anytime a corporation of that size intersects with the public's use of resources, it seems appropriate. But that said, Mr. Anderson, my concern around this, particularly around the aqua recovery, you used the specific term, and when the mayor asked you the question, how will rural residents nearby be affected? You used the term, we believe it to be true that we would not be affected. I would love to hear something a little more reassuring than you believe it to be true, that we won't suddenly find ourselves a little starved for water out here.
Well, thank you for that question. So one thing that's I'm have good confidence in is it won't affect residents at 7 Mile Hill because that is a completely different groundwater source. The wells and the aquifers in the 7 Mile area are separated from those in the city by the Chenoweth Fault and the syncline, which serves as a barrier or a boundary between the two water sources. So there is that. I'm sorry, was there a second part to your question?
I just didn't know if is that may be it. Is that sufficient for? I mean, my concern is larger than just my little piece of property. Just in general, nearby residentials. What study has been done to provide that assurance to?
So one of the first of the 3 studies that I mentioned looked at the capacity of the Dalles groundwater reservoir, the aquifer that we are talking about, supplying these new wells, and which already supplies the city's existing wells. And again, from current and prior studies, we know that the annual capacity of that aquifer is about 5,500 acre feet per year. And currently about 1,800 acre feet per year are being used. So there's a lot of additional capacity there that allows us to utilize some more water and still have a good buffer between, the current capacity, if it were to, even if it decreased somewhat, and meet the projected needs that would occur under this proposed agreement.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. I appreciate it. And I thank you, Council, for letting a county resident to ask some questions. It's appreciated.
You're welcome. Don Rasmussen.
Thank you. This is Dawn Rasmussen. My address is 1335 Oak Hill Drive in the Dalles. Actually, I'm a county resident, so I'm also not in the city. First of all, I'd like to thank city staff and our elected officials for all of the due diligence and hard work that has been done to date on this project. However, I wanted to specifically address climate change and its possible impacts on the proposed aquifer recharge. Many news sources, including most recently OPB on November 3rd, 2021, have been warning and reporting about declining, if not completely eliminated, winter snowpacks by 2070. Additionally, drought conditions over the past 30 years have resulted in more devastating wildfires. More importantly, in the last 10 years, large fires have become an issue. With this coming to light, it shows the lack of water content. This affects fish and wildlife and residential users outside the city limits who rely on wells upon which to draw their water. Residents in these areas have seen depression in their water supplies, and the water supply in general seems to be declining. And I'm afraid we're going to see this much more often. I believe that there's a lack of information about projections should the rainfall and snowfall fail to come and the aquifer not be recharged during the wetter winter months. Councilor Richardson was touching on some of this in his questions from earlier. This could result in deficit situations. We already saw some of this during the rationing that took place when the smelter was in operation and there was a drought. At what point do we enter into a deficit situation as rainfall becomes less and less frequent and snow melt becomes non-existent? Who gets the water, the city or Google? And secondly, who paid for the studies? Was it Google or was it a company recommended by Google? Thank you very much.
Go ahead, Mr. Anderson.
Well, thank you. A couple of the issues you raised, I think we've already addressed in terms of the efforts underway by the city to improve resiliency. That adding more tools to our water supply toolbox will give us more options and be able to wield water around from different sources and really optimize our supply scenarios. I think we also talked about the who gets the water question, as far as the highest priority being the public health and public safety needs of the community, should there be an emergency or a shortage. There was one point, oh my gosh, I just lost it, that you made at the very end that was new. And I wanted to respond to, and I'm sorry I've lost it.
Ms. Rasmussen, can you repeat the last point that you made?
It was very close to the end of your comments. I apologize.
Okay, good. I wasn't sure if I had unmuted me. I said, at what point do we enter into a deficit situation? I haven't heard any potential projections.
Yeah, I don't, there aren't projection. It is not projected that we would enter into a deficit situation. We know, again, the sustainable annual yield, and we're not even talking about developing into that full existing capacity. And that goes to your point of, well, what if the capacity declines? Well, we already have some space there some room there to account for that. So I hope that helps answer your question.
I don't know if okay. Well, I believe that we're going to have a situation where the aquifer is going to be tapped into, and then there's supposed to be a surplus put into there's actually, Google only take out 95% of whatever water is going to be put down there. What happens if we are in an overall pattern where rainfall is decreasing? We may have brand new pipelines, but if there's no water coming down the pipeline, then what does that do for our community, and who's going to win that water war?
Well, first of all, Google won't be withdrawing any water. The city will be, and the city would be withdrawing and providing that supply to meet the demands of its entire community. And the second part is, I think we've touched on before, should there be a water supply emergency, who gets the water? The public health and safety needs of the community get that water first.
Okay, so could I just clarify, and I'm sorry, I'm splitting hairs here, so thank you for your patience with me. So if we have declining water and it becomes a deficit situation, where does Google fit into that? Are they still going to have access to water, or would we cut them out? Are we going to serve our citizens? We obviously, the emergency services and whatnot, that's the emergency part, but where do the residents fall in there versus what would Google get? Thank you for answering that question.
I believe that question's been answered. Is there anything more you want to add, Dave?
No, I think we've identified that the highest priority is the public health and safety needs of the community. After that, there is shared curtailment across the entire community. I just remembered what other point that you had mentioned that I was going to respond to. You mentioned water restrictions in the 90s when the aluminum plant was operating. Those two things are completely unrelated. The aluminum plant was supplying its own water for its uses. The water restrictions that the city used to implement every year, every summer, prior to about 1994, was because we didn't have any residential water meters. People were charged a flat rate for as much water as they wanted to use. Once we installed residential water meters and people paid, at least in part, on a basis of volume, we have not had any restrictions or curtailment since that time. So that was the point I wanted to pick up on and clarify for folks.
Okay. Is there anybody else who would like to ask a question or make a comment? Last call.
Mayor, you have Columbia Gorge News with the hand raised.
Okay, Columbia Gorge News, ask your question. Sorry, I didn't see it.
No, thank you. So my name is Alana Lackner, ALANA-LACKNER. I live at 104 West 4th Street in the Dalles. And I was just going to say that one of the questions that Ms. Rasmussen asked that didn't get addressed, I noticed, was who paid for the studies was one that she asked at the end. if Google paid for them or if they were done by a company that Google recommended. So I just wanted to make sure that those got answered since they seem to be forgotten.
Thank you for that. The 3 studies that were conducted were in fact paid for by Google. The first one around water supply and capacity was done by GSI, Groundwater Solutions Incorporated, and they're a firm that the city has utilized for most of the last 20 years for all of our own water supply planning. They're very familiar with the city system. The city staff is very familiar with them. They're extremely capable with expertise in water rights, water supply planning, hydrogeotechnical analyses. The second study that was done around the needed infrastructure was done by RH2 Engineering. Again, a very well-established engineering firm in the Pacific Northwest with expertise in water supply planning and design, who the city has worked with in the past. And the third one, the study about water quality for a well drilled in the port area, was done by Mall, Foster and Longy, again with a well-established firm with expertise in land use and environmental planning, environmental analyses. The city had not worked with them before, but they proved to be very capable and up to the task. The last point I'd like to make is that the city was at the table through the development, raised many questions as all 3 of these studies were being developed, challenged some initial findings to be sure that our interests were met, to be, again, help us make sound technical decisions associated with drafting of this proposed agreement.
And again, I'd like to reiterate that those 3 studies are all public documents and available on the city's website. And if anybody would like to get access to that and they have any issues with or problems, please contact our city clerk, Izetta Grossman. Thank you for the question. Anybody else? I can only see 25 screens, but I'm scrolling through the list.
Tom Peterson has his hand up.
Tom Peterson. Okay, Mr. Peterson, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, 2 questions. One, I forgot to ask it way on. I'm sorry I didn't do it earlier. When Dave Anderson, when you talk about the Dalles groundwater, those numbers of 5,500 acre feet, how old are those numbers? And we're currently using 1,800, and we're going to have a pretty good buffer. But how recently were those numbers, I guess, updated or studied?
Those numbers are referenced again, I believe, in a 2018 report to the Oregon Water Resources Department.
Okay, great. Thank you. Second question, ASR, what's the cost on maintaining that versus the system we currently have?
Well, there'll be a little more cost there. So there's a fair amount of monitoring associated with aquifer storage and recovery, or ASR. There are the costs of that water would be slightly higher than water just coming from the water treatment plant, because we're actually treating it. Our current system operates completely by gravity, mostly by gravity once it leaves the water treatment plant. And in this case, it would be flowing by gravity and supplied into the well, but then there would be a repumping. So there would be a slightly higher cost associated with that. Those costs are going to be easily covered by the rates paid by this new industry for the water that it's utilizing.
Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. Anybody else? Okay, I'm scrolling through the names. I don't see any hands raised except for Mr. Peterson. So would anybody else like to ask a question of the staff or the city council, or make a comment? Last call. Okay, seeing no other hands raised, I'm going to turn it back over to the city council for any last comments and deliberation in consideration of the resolution?
Mayor Mays, did you close the public hearing or you're not doing that?
I'm not doing that.
Thank you.
Well, I'm closing public comment. Yes, I didn't think this was a formal public hearing, so. I'd like to encourage people that if they have questions even after this meeting to submit them in writing to the city clerk, and we'll see that they get answered. Okay, city council, anybody want to speak at this point? Or make a comment? Councilor Runyon. And then Councilor Long.
Okay. I think I'm unmuted now. I just want to give a big thank you to staff and especially Dave Anderson, Public Works Director, and his team. And I know he's not alone out there. We have had, many subjects over the last couple of years that I've been involved with City Council, but none that I can recall had as much talk from the community, which I appreciate. And I've tried to answer most of them and have read all of them, just as Councilor Long mentioned earlier. I think we all do the research. We don't just come to a meeting. I've learned very clearly that these counselors really care about the topics and come well armed with not only questions, but research on their own. So I really appreciate all the work that goes into it. And I appreciate the community for being involved. And I'm looking for some really great outcomes from this project for our entire community. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Long.
Well, and in a lot of ways, I just want to echo what Councilman Runyon said. I do want to thank everyone who's participated in this process, either by attending meetings or taking the time to call or email thoughtful questions and concerns to us, as well as city employees. That is exactly what we want from our citizens. We need your participation in order to ensure that all the right questions were asked and answered before our deliberation tonight. I just want to assure some of the people who wrote to me and questioned my ability to make good decisions for the Dalles and whether or not I had the Dalles in my best interest. I just want to say that I did grow up here and I chose on purpose to return and raise my children who are now adults and who still live here in the Dalles. And I care very much about my hometown and including those who live outside the city limits, but whose lives are intertwined with ours. This has been a very difficult decision, and I had many concerns when we first started discussing the issue, and I've had many questions, and I was extremely skeptical myself, but as you've heard over the last few meetings, we've had all those questions answered. And so, as the mayor also said, if you still have questions afterward, please get them to us so we can get those answered to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other council members would like to make a comment? Councilor Richardson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, staff. Just a couple of brief comments from me. I want to say, echo Councilor Long's and Runyon's comments in large part, and say thank you to people that have taken the time to call or write or voice their thoughts. Those questions that people asked of us helped at least me in really thinking through this and asking questions of staff. I think I asked Dave Anderson, I don't know, half a dozen times, half a different ways if we're going to run out of water. So anyway, your questions were helpful. And that's real public participation, is showing up, asking questions of your counselors, or county commissioners, and etc. There's a lot of commentary put out in other channels like social media. That's not really public participation. So thank you to people that take the time to show up or to write or call. I would say also just a point, in my opinion, that This has not been a rushed question. It's not been secretive. In fact, it's been deliberative with a lot of public information. All the reports can be read. The staff report can be read. The proposed agreement is public. All of those things are available to people that want. And I know that I've received a number of comments about people that are wishful or concerned to know Google's use of water with greater precision than we have made public, due to that being a trade secret the company wishes to keep. And our city is obligated to honor that commitment that it's made. I would say that just as a fellow resident, fellow human being, that I would not oppose Google from releasing that data, not in a compulsory fashion, but just if the company were to feel that it would be useful or the neighborly thing to do. I do think that would put a lot of our residents' minds at ease if they were also to be privy to some of those numbers. But the people that do need to know them do know them and feel pretty good about them, I think it's fair to say. And I guess I want to say, Mr. Mayor, that to control, our water is in large part to control our destiny. And that's really, to my mind, the question here is not if we're going to give away city water. That's not really the question at hand. It's really, are we going to control our water supply? This agreement that's been proposed has really very modest cost to the city and a number of substantial benefits. I feel it's a great deal for us. It will increase our system resiliency and our storage capacity. I think it's a win. And I want to say good job in negotiating that to staff. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councilor. Anybody else on the city council like to make it? Councilor McLaughlin?
Well, I too would like to echo what I'm hearing from my fellow councilors. I would like everyone to know that if you really knew me, that we moved here many years ago, 48 years ago, and decided to make this our home. So we've invested our family, 3 children. I've taught many of your children, and my wife and I both have taught many of the people. In fact, I'm seeing on the screen. We have committed and we believe in this city. We love this city. We would not do anything to harm it. However, when we received emails and phone calls that call us names and use profanity, and that's just not appreciated. We're doing our best to represent you, and we appeal to you to work with us. Yes, we want to hear from you, but we also have a fiduciary obligation to do what's in the best interest of our city. And that's what I will do.
Thank you, Councilor. Anybody else? Okay, no other comments or questions from the city council? Okay. With that, would anybody like to make a motion to adopt the resolution? I think Councilor Randall is trying to unmute himself. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. I got the rest of you.
Okay.
Well, Councilor Randall was first.
Mayor Mays, did I hear you right? You're waiting for someone to make a motion?
Yes.
All right. I will move to adopt resolution number 21-028, a resolution authorizing the city manager to execute an infrastructure agreement with Moraine Industries LLC and Design LLC.
And McLaughlin will second that.
Okay, it's been moved by Counselor Randall and seconded by Counselor McLaughlin to approve the resolution. I would like to ask the city clerk for a roll call vote, please.
Sorry. Counselor Richardson,
Yes.
Counselor Runyon,
Aye.
Counselor Long,
Aye.
Counselor McLaughlin,
After carefully weighing all the facts surrounding this decision, I have arrived at the fiduciary conclusion that moving this agreement forward is in the best interest of our city. Aye.
You're out of
Counselor
order.
Randall,
Aye.
Okay, I count 5-0. A unanimous vote. There's nothing more I can say or add that already hasn't been said by 5 eloquent council members who do their homework and are acting, no question in my mind, in the best interests of the city of the Dalles. I'd also like to thank our staff for the hard work and the due diligence they showed in making this become a reality. Mr. Anderson, especially you, and Mr. Kara, thank you all. Thank you both for all of your hard work and your advice. Is there any other business that comes to anyone who would like to raise before the city council before we adjourn? Okay, with that, I'm adjourning the meeting. Thank you all very much for attending, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Thank you very much.